Hey folks, it's Michael with the CCERP podcast. Hope you are doing well. Hope you've been safe and getting outdoors during the COVID thing. We need the outdoor time. A lot of people have been using it to get outdoors more. So hopefully you're doing that too and continue. Now today we're going to talk about some creek function and flooding and the plan to deal with some flooding after especially Hurricane Harvey. See what the Army Corps wants to do with Buffalobayou and Cypress Creek. It's an important issue, of course. We know about flooding. There's been some from hurricanes and from heavy rains, but especially after Harvey. Looking on the internet, I think there's something on different places, but one thing says, final report shows Harvey's impact on Harris County by the numbers, and looks like it caused about, in Harris County, or maybe in general, it just says 125 billion in damage. Katrina, 160 billion. Others caused billions of dollars worth of damage. And it looks like about 60,000 people had to be rescued. 4.7 million people in Harris County impacted. 300,000 vehicles flooded, and so on. Clearly, something to think about and work with. And I'll post a link to some of this in the show notes so you can look up some of this if you're interested. But we've got to think about a way to do this smart and effectively. In Vermont, like for example, there's a video I can post to upstream where there was more work, more so-called improvements on a stream. Some of the stuff that people want to do with Buffalobayou or Cypress Creek. Up there on a stream, there was more flooding, but downstream, because they did things more naturally, there was less. But there are some feedback things going on that Bob can talk about how streams work. So on the one hand, you might think it's downstream, so there's going to be more water. So you think it'd be more likely to flood all the more. But then how does the stream as a whole affect itself? What's energy going on? How's it working? And we got to think about the whole big picture, keeping water here, keeping the stream connected to the floodplain, keeping wildlife, property values, things like that. So we'll talk about some of that today and think about, put out some ideas for optimal or better ways to deal with flooding than just putting concrete down the whole thing and changing it from a natural stream to a pipe. So we're here today talking with, again, people we've talked to in the past, return guests, Susan Chadwick and Bob Freitag. Can y'all introduce yourselves again, please?
So I'll go first, I guess. I'm Bob Freitag, and I'm with the University of Washington. I'm on the faculty there. I've been on the faculty there for about 20 years. Before that, I was the Federal Coordinating Officer for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and was also the Public Assistance Officer. Before that, I was the Education Officer with my 20 plus years with the university, or with FEMA. I retired from FEMA and opened up an institute at the University of Washington and kind of teach and do research and try to improve on the things that I should have done correctly when I was with FEMA.
You're not the only one.
Yeah.
I know some people in regenerative management who are that way too, like Alan Savory. I think he was in Africa, and because of what they believed at the time, he wanted to help the land, he thought, and help the vegetation. So he was involved in killing, because they thought it was for the best, thousands of elephants. And now it's a burden he's got to carry to this day. It hurts his heart because he found out how he was wrong and how the elephants are important for the vegetation and ecosystem. And so he goes about trying to help people learn how to really regenerate land and take care of it. Other people too. But did you have more to say? Or
Oh, I think I thank goodness I didn't. I don't have that to carry around.
Yeah, yeah.
My burdens are like I promoted the flood insurance program, and that was the environmental program of the day. And there are some very obvious inconsistencies with the NFIP and and the way the world's evolving. Before that, by the way, before I worked for FEMA, I was a school teacher, and so I'm back as a school teacher. So that's my kind of background.
Like university school?
Well, university school, it's a lot easier. When I left FEMA, I wanted to work for intermediate school. And because I left teaching, because I was assigned an intermediate grade, and I just could not deal with intermediate kids. I just did not. I just did not like that 13 and 14-year-old group. And so I left and went back to school. And so when I left FEMA, I said, my gosh, I'm old enough now and I can handle the classroom. And so when I went to apply, they said, well, your certification is long expired, so you're going to have to go back to school again. And so then I talked to some friends at the University of Washington to start up our institute. And since the universities in general have no requirement for education, they didn't require certification. So I'm now teaching graduate students where before I taught 13-year-olds.
Yeah,
And,
graduate students are slightly more self-controlled than 13 and 14-year-olds.
And the fact that they're paying $30,000 a year certainly is enough incentive for them to,
yeah.
To do the work.
Yeah. 13 and 14, geez. They're like nice in elementary school and they're obedient. And then before they become more independent in high school, junior high school, a bunch of squirrels running around.
Oh God. Well, anyway, so that's me. I've written a couple of books and some articles and some other things and doing research in flooding. And currently I'm teaching a floodplain management course for the university. And next quarter, I'll be doing a hazard mitigation course and then working on a resilience course the following quarter.
And you wrote a book about floodplain management?
Floodplain management, yeah.
I'll link to that in the class notes or show notes too. Cool.
And Susan, sorry.
Well, that's okay. I was just thinking about telling people about how Bob Freitag in his book, Floodplain Management, New Approach for a New Era, is our Bible. I'm the executive director of Save Buffalo Bayou, and we're an environmental advocacy group founded in 2014 to stop a project, flood control district project that would have stripped the trees and altered the channel in one of the last remaining publicly accessible forested stretches of the stream in Houston. And we managed to persuade them not to do that. But now they've come up with this other, the flood control, the Corps of Engineers has come up with this idea of deepening and widening Buffalo Bayou for some 22 miles from the dams in far west Houston all the way to downtown. It's kind of surprising because the flood control district long ago gave up that idea because it was stopped by a group of citizens back in the 60s and 70s. The Corps, the flood control district, the Corps was working with the flood control district back then to strip and straighten and channelize and concrete most of our other bayous, major bayous in the city. But anyway, before I started this with some friends, I was the art critic for the Houston Post. But Bob's book and the ideas in the book are everything that informs my thinking and understanding about how rivers work and what should be done and what shouldn't be done. And unfortunately, I think that most of what the orientation of both our flood control district, which was founded in 1937, back in, what you did was strip and straighten and concrete streams and try to move water as fast as possible. That thinking has changed, unfortunately. The way the Corps operates, although the Corps is supposed to have some different ideas, I think maybe the Corps operates a little differently out there in the Pacific Northwest. but they're still stuck in, the thinking of the 30s and 40s or even the 60s. And of course, they're somewhat limited legally in what they can do. But anyway, I just want to thank Bob and his co-authors for the important work that they've done. And I give the book out to everybody I can.
Oh, thank you.
And we recommend it to everyone, because one of the big problems is getting people to understand how the public and politicians to understand how nature works, how rivers work, what the process is, why it's better to base your flood risk reduction measures on the way that the river is going to work anyway. It's going to do what it wants to do. And we've shown that even here in Buffalobayou, because the areas where they have altered it, or somewhat straightened it, the river just tries to go back to where its natural meanders are. There are natural underlying, geologic reasons why the water flows the way that it does. As even Toni Morrison says, rivers have a memory and are always trying to get back to where they were.
Toni who?
Toni Morrison, the great writer.
And why do you recommend that book? Like, some people might be thinking, like someone said to me who doesn't know me, and this is clearly like weird, just someone like mouthing off without knowing what they're talking about. But I said something on Facebook recently, and someone said, "That's just typical Austin liberal hippie bull squat." And I don't know what you mean by. What, Siri? I'm not talking to you. I know you know what I mean by this. You're not supposed to. Just be quiet. Sorry, whoops. Really I don't know what you mean by. But is it the book like that, or is it just like a bunch of back to earth, give up civilization stuff, or is it like scientific, or why would you recommend it?
I'm not recommending a book. I'm recommending a quote.
No, and, the Floodplain book.
The Floodplain. And she is comparing writers to a river. But
I mean the Floodplain book.
The quote is on our website. I can send it to you.
No, the Floodplain book.
It's about stripping and straightening the Mississippi River, and how the river always tried to get back to where it was, that it remembers where it was. And writers are like that, she said. If I can find the quote, I will read the whole thing to you. They're always trying to get back to their flooding is like their memories. Yeah. And they're always trying to get back to those memories.
But why the book? Why recommend it?
And we started our book, by the way, with that quote, rivers do what rivers do. That was our opening catch line. So that's good.
So great.
Why the book, Susan? Like, why do you recommend the book?
I'm only recommending Bob Freitag's book.
But why? Why that one in particular?
I just explained that everything, all of his ideas about respecting the natural process of the river, working with nature, understanding floodplains and how they work, why dredging and engineering a stream doesn't work. I don't know, Bob. Why don't you take over?
Well, no, that's I don't want to stop you. I'm feeling pretty good about this now. I was asked to redo it, and maybe I should redo it and update it. The kind of theme behind the book is flooding is just a change, and hazards are just a change in general. And so when water comes and there's a flood, it's just a change in condition, and it's neither good nor bad. And in looking at the core reports, and I can't really get too specific about what's happening around Houston because I'm far away, but if you look at just the word efficiency, that they're trying to be efficient. Efficient for what? I mean, if you want to be efficient to move water and you have one objective, to make a straight Teflon channel is an efficient way to move water. If from point A to point B. If you're talking about an efficient way to build something that costs less, then you might want to put something that would help that channel to sustain itself. And the things that we know that are self-controlling that help sustain something, are things that are green. And so our natural environment provides ecosystem services that help the efficiency. If we say the objective is to, let's say, move water and have a channel that sustains itself, now you've got two objectives. If you have an objective of holding water, because water is neither good nor bad, and Houston, got pummeled with, during Harvey, but it's also has periods of drought. And so as the climate is changing, we're going to have wetter periods and drier periods, and that water is going to be more available, more valuable than it is. And so I think that one of the problems with the 1930s approach is that it makes a lot of sense from an engineering standpoint, because all the equations work when you control it. If you have a Teflon channel, all the equations work very well. And if you start to put nature-assisted things in there or provide some natural ecosystem services, it becomes a little more confusing for those formulas. And engineers have a hard time with that. So you kind of step back, and the engineering community does very well at what it does. And but it has a set of tools. The hydrologists have a set of tools, and I think that we've all heard it. If you have a hammer, then I guess the world is a nail, and so that's what you kind of think of. But stepping back from that, and what's efficient, you have to say what's efficient. The most efficient thing, if you want to look, is a tree. I mean, if you look at a tree, and you look at a tree grows, it takes care of itself. It doesn't take a lot of maintenance. Has soil, and it absorbs a lot of water, and it actually sweats. And so the tree releases a lot of water. It holds a lot of soil. And in this period of an increasing, global warming, we're going to have more hot days, and we're going to have, and having a tree by your house, 2 or 3 trees by your house, you have shade, and you have actually that releasing of water, that sweating of a tree actually reduces the temperature around the tree by several degrees. And so you have a lot of things. So another alternative to hold these downpours would be to have plant more trees. So if you have the larger watershed and you want to not convey the water, but you want to hold the water a little bit to absorb in the ground, to be able to be used during those dry periods, and also to have a tremendous, green environment that, provides some cooling benefits, then you want to look at other kinds of efficiencies. And the efficiency of moving the water off the land as quick as you can, is not efficient at providing storage or providing water for future use or cleaning water or cooling the environment, those things. And the classic example, there's a great book. I think you've heard of it. It's called Rising Tide. It's an old book. It's about the Mississippi. And what was done is that in the 1860s you had these steamships that kind of evolved, and for the first time you could actually take supplies upriver, it's just not float them down. And so you took them up there. So these steamships went up the river, and they came across all these snags. And so the snags were trees that came off the banks. And so, my gosh, if there are all these snags in the river and these steamships can't get up there, well, let's remove the snags. Well, they remove the snags. Well, if the snags come from the banks, and there are all these forests on the banks, why don't we just remove the trees before they become snags? Well, that makes sense. And then
still doing it.
And then you had a lot of sediment came in. Well, so we'll look at what we'll do is we'll tighten the river, and we'll put these levees on both sides of the river, and by tightening the river, because now we have all that sediment coming in, there'll be less sediment coming in, and the river will be faster. We just move it down there. Well, the problem is once you build one levee, then you kind of set the stage. So now you have levees all the way up to Cairo, or Cairo, depending upon, but Cairo, Illinois, and so they've set the situation. And now they have a side channel, a floodway, their definition of a floodway, the Corps' definition of floodway, that takes the water down. And that land, if it had been allowed to flood, you would have lost some land in terms of buildable land that's always dry, but you would have increased the cooling of the area. You would have stored water. Agriculture would have been improved with a different kind of system. So again, this efficiency of moving water, Houston has a problem, and there's a big downpour that happens, and you have a couple huge basins, that were designed to hold that water for a short period of time. But there are other ways to hold that water too. And I don't know if they were fully explored. I think that the easiest mathematical solution is to build a pipe. And but as I said before, and I'll stop and you can ask questions, it's very efficient to get water in. And there were several generals with the Corps of Engineers who said, the goal of the Corps of Engineers is to make sure that water doesn't go into the Sound or go into the Gulf. That water is used to its full capacity before it goes in, kind of like the Colorado River. Well, that's wrong too, right? Because but what going back to the Mississippi, which is my favorite river, because they try to make it more efficient in terms of moving water, more efficient and having enough depth to get the steamships up and down. They lost efficiency in storing the water. They lost the efficiency of cleaning the Mississippi. We now have this huge dead zone that's out of the Mississippi, and you have these huge amounts of sediment that are going through. So we now understand that everything is connected to everything else, and when we do something like this, like a channel, then we're also stuck with maintaining it forever. And
well, maybe you could explain the ecosystem service. You talked about cleaning the water. People don't understand necessarily that all that vegetation and the trees and everything alongside the stream actually performs a service of cleansing the water.
If you look, there's a great river in Oregon called I was going to say the Klamath River. I think it's the Klamath River. But what it does, it goes out of the Cascades, and then it goes through a bunch of farmland, and then it goes through the coastal range, and then it goes out to the ocean. And they've studied the water quality. A drop of water that falls on the land, may work its way down the river, but then it goes to the side channel. It goes into what's called the hyporheic area. It goes down to the water table, comes up, so that the water that comes down doesn't go in the channel. There's a plume of underneath the channel where that water moves through. And so if you look at the water that comes off of the coastal range and goes through this farmland, starts to pick up all of the the pesticides and things that are put on the farm. And so they tested the water when it comes out of the Cascades. It's pretty clean, very clean. Then it goes through this farm area, this plateau, and then it absorbs all of these carcinogenics. But then it goes through the coastal range, and it goes through another area where there's less development, and it comes out that end much, much cleaner. And so what happens is, as it goes through the soil, there's a filtering. Also, there's a lot of microbes that actually eat those pollutants and those carcinogenics. Not the heavy metals and cadmium and that, but even that is actually stored. So all of that process, when you build that Teflon, the water that you have at the head of the Teflon channel and the water you have at the end is equally pollutant. When you put it through a natural environment, the water is filtered, and those microbes, eat the pollutants, and go up in the trees, and you have it cools the area, stores the area, the water, and it's done naturally. I mean, if you do a nice system, you don't you have to maintain a little bit because we have a built environment around it, but it is pretty sustainable and less expensive over the long run.
Well, could you speak in that regard to the issue also of flood tunnels? Because flood tunnels here is one of the issues, one of the ways that they're talking about trying to get all the excess water due to development, covering over the land from West Houston around the dams, which are overburdened, directly out into Galveston Bay.
And so people know really quick, that costs like $12 billion as opposed to some other things, it would be still a lot, like $1 billion or $2 billion, right?
Yeah. Are they thinking of a tunnel, or are they thinking of a large storage area like they have in Chicago or in New York, I think, and we have one here now that's just being built. So there's a deep tunnel. The one I know most about is the one in Chicago, where it's just they put one of these large moles underneath, and they made this huge cavern that stores the water during the wet season, and then pumps it out, during the, when there's capacity within the existing system. That has the same problem of you have dirty water going in. It's an interesting, I watched the video. If you look at the Army Corps as a video about the project, which they use an Australian example, and Australia is a very unique area because their drought is more of a problem than their flooding. And so holding water becomes extremely, extremely important. They also do a lot of recharge because of that. And so they try to, pump the water back down in the aquifers to recharge it. There's some issues there with pollutants because they don't, when they pump it directly down, you don't have that filtering process and that microbe eating process that goes on naturally. Mm-hmm. So, I haven't answered your question because when you just shove the water out into the sound, then there's none of that natural processes that go through. And so it's efficient, I guess, in getting water from one point to the other point, but it's not efficient for cleaning the water. And now you have polluted the Gulf, and you start to create another dead zone by doing that.
And if we were machines, that'd be all right. Physics is important. We must consider it, obviously, but we need the broader picture of biology and ecology. We got to consider the geology, the biology, the ecology involved, not only the physics. That's part of the problem. But
well, as I keep saying, and as I learned from Bob's book, the issue is that flooding begins on the land. Mm-hmm. And, I think the general thesis of Bob and others is that we need to stop stormwater before it floods our streams. And my understanding is that if we just create more capacity to convey more water faster, they're just developers and everybody else, people are just going to continue to produce more water faster without any regard to where it goes or how it moves. And I think that we need to focus on everything we can do from the individual level to a neighborhood level to the city and the county. You're starting to talk a lot about, nature-based flood management, green versus gray. But the Corps of Engineers and the Flood Control District have their mission.
And I think that it's important to think of the long term. If you're talking about green, green-based projects, I think that, and that's that's more than just making a levee and planning it with green things. There's a relationship between those processes, and I think that the issue has to do with take the word efficiency, and I'm going to dwell on that because that was used in the report. The moving the water off the land very quickly is not very efficient to store water for future use. It's not very efficient to have a water table that nurtures an environment. It's not very efficient at cleaning the water. It's just it does one thing. And if there were a system, let's say, we're doing a lot of bioswales up here, and those are green based but expensive, and they're engineered facilities, and so but we're trying to hold the water as much on the land as we possibly can. The Northwest is rich in water now, but as the climate is changing, and as it has changed, we have these wetter and wetter winters and drier summers, and we're starting to have areas where it's water starved, especially up in the mountains. So we're trying to think of ways to keep that water up in the mountains. The snow did a great job, but as that snow level is getting higher and higher and higher, we don't have those snow reservoirs to keep what used to be wet. And so our forests are drying out, and you can see this just with the amount of forest fires we've had. So it's compounded by the fact that we have allowed the fuels to build up, but it is increased tremendously because we now have hotter summers that are drier, and these huge firestorms. And with that, we start a whole new cycle. And after the fire up here, we have areas that don't have the foliage, and so the water that rains in the winter, that comes down in the winter, runs off very, very quickly. The soil is baked, and there's a nice little term called hydrophobic that the water runs off and scours and just takes that soil where it's needed from up here and down in the valleys. And so we started a whole process that is just very, it's going to change our lives. It's changing our lives. As you know, we've had 2 summers now, and this where we've had these huge amounts in Seattle of just fire climate. I mean, fire, just smog, and where it wasn't safe to go outside. And so, and that's something that's going to happen. Our forests used to be sequester carbon, and now they're releasing carbon, which is also causing a climate variation. So I think in terms of Houston, I think that a lot of individual efforts to just increase the amount of storage on land by increasing foliage and looking at urban developments can be can contain the water. I mean, you can have an urban development and still have flows that remain on that developed area through permeable streets, through increased foliage, through having swales that can temporarily hold it. You can even have wet gardens in the yards. There are ways to hold the water on land and then up in the upper watershed, and then you still get that water moving down, but it goes slower and it can be used during those dry periods.
Well, and that might help with subsidence too. We have kind of an issue with, I don't think it seems to me that if the land is all paved over and the water can't infiltrate into the water table below, that eventually those...
Is that the subsidence, is that due to drilling for oil, or is that because of water table and...
In some areas, it's due to water pumping, wells.
Water pumping?
Yeah.
I think South Houston somewhere, there's that problem.
Yeah. Out in your area, there's a problem, Michael. Yeah. But it seems to me, too, though, that if you just cover everything up with concrete and the water can't get into the water table, it's eventually going to subside also. And especially around the areas where they've concreted the bayou, some of our major bayous, if that water can't soak into the ground as it flows, wouldn't that cause subsidence in the areas in the floodplains surrounding?
If there's a lot of mechanical issues about the soil, but there are some aquifers when you withdraw it, they just collapse. And once because they've kind of built up over time, and once they collapse, they're no longer used. They can't be recharged. And so, and I think that by spreading the water over the land, that the bayou, if allowed to meander and develop and create the wetland that it did before, would have a huge amount of ecosystem services in terms of temperature moderation, in terms of providing habitat for everything from commercial fisheries to domestic fisheries. It would provide a lot of recreational uses that are hard to quantify. But in recharging the aquifer, that's extremely important. I don't know what's below that, and I know those bayous are pretty extensive, but you've got to look at efficiencies for everything, and also in time. If you want to get the water really off the land tomorrow, I guess to build a pipe is the way you do it. If you want to get the water, because as you build this green infrastructure, it does take a little time to establish itself.
And let me say, are you done? Sorry.
Yeah.
And one thing, people might think, well, we got to do something now before a flood comes. But if we dam Cypress Creek upstream, that's scheduled to take 20 years.
Yeah.
Or some stuff, even if you want to line Buffalo Bayou with a bunch of concrete, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes a long time. We need to put good thought into this to do things right. We have the time for the thinking, to think big picture and to consider all these things. It's not a rush because it's impossible to do this very quickly. And we want to hopefully use our money wisely. There's places in Europe and places in the United States and other places where people spent a lot of money channelizing and straightening rivers and stuff, and then billions, and then what do? They spend billions more making it natural again. It's like, I know. So it's like, why not just leave it and learn to work with that instead of wasting $2 billion twice to mess it up and then undo it,
The Dutch are, there's two things the Netherlands actually contributes to the world, tulips and are one, and engineers are the other, hydraulic engineers. And but they have a concept of living with flooding. And if you look at the Netherlands, it's very flat, but they're storing water everywhere. So nobody lives close to those canals. There's a setback. They're allowing the canals. It's very constructed. It's very engineer specific, but they are using, to the extent practicable, their entire country to store water.
And I've read that they're getting rid of some of their dikes. I think
they're getting rid of a lot of their dikes, and they're trying to kind of hold the water. They're much of their land is underwater, and so their sea dikes are needed. But the internal storage areas, they're making as much use as they can. One of the issues there is because as the seas rise, you still have the dikes, but then again, talking about that groundwater, a lot of that groundwater is alkaline because it's the sea, right? Sea and salt water, and it's working its way in to some of those farm areas. So they have, and they're doing everything that they can do from a natural standpoint, including trying to manufacture. They're coming up with some kinds of cabbages that are very, very salt resistant, and other plants that can absorb that, and they can still have an agricultural economy in those areas that are salt tolerant. So many things they're doing. A lot of their plants now have their root system above the ground in large greenhouses that are growing, where they can kind of remove some of the salt before they feed it into those greenhouses. Mm-hmm. So, getting back to Houston, I think that the entire watershed, the entire watershed entire basin should be looked as an area to hold that water in any way you can possibly do it, and allow for a more natural system. Once
Well,
go ahead.
wait. Well, the Corps actually did have a companion study called the Metropolitan Regional Watershed Study, and we were supporting that. But for some reason, that it just kind of got shunted aside. I don't know what's happening to it. I feel bad about sometimes criticizing the Corps too much, because I think they're getting a lot. They're understaffed. They're not getting much funding. They don't seem to be able to do what they need to do. Not that we want them to do it.
And they're under a lot of pressure. I mean, the head of the Corps is the colonel, and the colonel becomes a general if the colonel is approved by recommended by the president, approved by the Senate, I think. I mean, so there's the political overtone to what they're doing, and the colonels want to do a good project that's accepted and provide the political inertia for advancement. And so there's that, but there's also just that we're dealing with the new science, and we're dealing with, when you're talking about ecosystem services, it's not as clean in terms of those those formulas on how to get rid of the water, and it does take some time. And also, the Corps doesn't have control over it. I mean, if you deal with, if the world's a hammer and you're looking for a nail, the Corps does have some control over the the corridor, the water corridor, but the city has control over the land. And if you want to talk about having the city solve the problem, if there was no Corps, they would have to use their existing channels and online reservoirs and shallow areas to hold the water. So,
well, I know you've said this before, that in terms of dealing with the new science, I know that Michael would be interested in this, is that part of the problem is that this sort of intersection of biology or ecosystem services and engineering is kind of a new field, and that there aren't enough people who really understand that.
I think that there's that. I think the important thing to know that it's getting bigger, and there are some just ambiguities in it, and I think that you have to kind of accept that. The important thing for me is when you talked about the project started in the 30s. All the projects during the 30s, during the Roosevelt administration and the New Deal, not the New Green Deal, but the New Deal, they were all work projects. And so there was little environmental science. So when all the dams, the levees, and the CCC projects were to create work, and if they did some good, they did some good. And so if you're looking at job creation, and you're looking at, this is a multi-million-dollar project will have so many jobs. The environmental aspects also have jobs, and have as many jobs, and they're slightly different jobs, and they are dispersed. And many of the jobs are just planting trees and making, if the Corps would make available a whole bunch of different trees that people could plant on their land within that watershed, then you'd have local gardeners doing that, local landscape people. You still have jobs. And if you look at treed areas like Yosemite, which is an extreme example, the density of rivers and streams is very low, because there's just so much water that's absorbed in this biomass that you just don't have that amount of water for to go into corridors. And so there are other ways to kind of think of the problem than just the classic, if we have water on land, let's make a channel to get it off the land. That just the kind of fun example that I became involved with was up in Idaho. They had the Salmon River. A lot of the farmers have all these canals, and they have water rights there, and they own the water rights, and they want to maintain the water rights, but the canals leak a lot. And so somebody came up with, well, let's make them more efficient. let's tighten the canals so that water that isn't used in the canals can go someplace else. Well, there's a big issue with water rights because the farmer didn't want to lose that. But also, 100 miles downstream were all of these orchards. And these orchards were only there because they had water that worked their way from up north through these lava tubes and groundwater to those areas. And so if you say, okay, if we make those canals more efficient and we save that water, all of a sudden you've killed a side effect. And so everything's related to everything else. And, when you have one major project, like get rid of water off the land, you have a lot of efficiencies that are lost for other objectives. And the Army Corps, I can say my best friends, it's really true, but I've got my best friends work for the Army Corps of Engineers, or I have, anyway. But they're working with their environment. The cost benefit analyses depends what's on that numerator, and they, to use another extreme example of that's an equity example. If you have, let's say, a project that's worth $1 million, to protect this very, very wealthy community, and you're protecting $1 million homes, then all of a sudden, my gosh, the numerator is very high. But let's say you have that same project that protects low-income homes
with 10 people, with more people in them.
With more people in them, but that numerator is not the same, right?
Right.
And so it doesn't protect $1 billion investment. It protects twice the number of people. Well, then you get into the basic problem of cost benefit analysis. It becomes very cultural and very base. And then
that's been a big issue here in Harris County. But speaking of that too, somebody asked the commander during one of the virtual public meetings whether they monetize the environmental benefits, the ecosystem services that might be eliminating, and they said no.
Yeah, and let me say about that. Sorry, so some folks know a little bit. Like, my ideas about this, like as Bob was saying earlier, there's a lot of jobs you could do. So if we got rid of some of these silly ideas the culture has about lawns, that's a major silliness, just a cultural fad. Comes from England, maybe, I think, but if lawns could be more natural, then we could have more jobs. Like people who cut the yards now would be into gardening, so people could come around and help. Like the people who do lawns right now could garden. They could take some for their own, have more to eat. They could take some to the farmers markets. They could give some to poor people. Everybody would have more nutritious food, so it would help people be more healthier. And then around creeks and streams, we could have nature areas where people could do more yoga. They could get outside more and get the vitamin D they need. Americans in general, for the most part, are way low in vitamin D because they're indoors too much, don't get outside, don't get enough physical activity. We don't have good fitness and mobility because we're sitting in chairs so much. We constrict ourselves to what we can do. So if we had that stuff, we could have, what kind of trees can you have? People just think, oh, it's a tree, but pecan, apple, citrus grow all around here. There's a lot of stuff we could grow, so we could have a lot of food forests. That's actually a concept. You can look it up on YouTube and everything. Food forests in Houston, and then we'd have less trouble feeding people. There'd be fewer poor people. People could work on that stuff. Like, I know a park where people used to live, and there's an old pear tree, but of course it's dying because no one's taking care of it. But if someone would take care of it, it would flourish. Hey, there's food right there. Mm-hmm. So as you say, there's a lot of things we could be doing. Fitness, outdoor activity, places where students could get outside to study biology and nature and ecology, food stuff. A lot we could be doing with that land that's not thought about enough, or as you say, monetized and considered in terms of what we're going to do, the possibility.
Yeah.
But
there's a couple websites. David Suzuki, if you know him, he used to have his own TV program, and he has He has an organization in British Columbia that actually was, I don't know how far they are, but they were taking a little section of land, and they were saying how many ecosystem services are on that land. So if you develop that land into an apartment, what do you lose? What do you gain in terms of the city? And so I don't know where he is on that, but that concept of evaluating ecosystem services, Costanza is the big leader in that, or his group. He was out of the University of Oregon. I don't know where he is now, Costanza. But it's in how you value that. There's also a group called Earth Economics that is a group in Seattle. I think they're for profit. I don't think they're nonprofit, but they specialize and they helped FEMA write up some cost benefit analysis for their hazard mitigation program.
Cool.
That took some ecosystem services into effect. And so I think that we are, just getting into this, but at first blush, having a bathtub and then putting a drain and having that as your basic concept really is, very shallow thinking. And I think, if the Corps is doing that, I know a lot of people in the Corps, and they have a lot of ecologists that kind of work on the projects up here, because our issue here are trying to save fish. And because we have these India treaty rights where they were given the fish and the white folk were given the farming, and the nexus between farming and fish is now, what you put on the land and what you remove and what you have run off into these streams is affecting the fish flows. And that nexus is becoming very important.
We eat the fish, so it comes in us.
Yeah, it comes in us.
Think about that. Yeah.
And so the tribes are starting to sue the farmers for polluting the streams, and the cities for having undersized culverts that are disturbing the fish flows. And so that relationship is becoming, we now understand that. And so to have the bathtub and the drain, I can't think of, I can't imagine in today's world them thinking of the world as a bathtub and a drain. I just don't.
And speaking of FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Program, I frequently or sometimes refer to the community rating system.
Yeah.
Because they do make an effort to rate a community based on how well they handle their floodplains and how well they kind of maintain the ecosystem services or the benefits of the natural floodplain. But so when I have criticized a project, I sometimes refer to that. But it makes me wonder: does anybody ever actually look at that and say, well, if you do that project, we're going to change your rating, or
it's based on that. If you're rated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we in the Northwest, we have, I think Seattle is not Seattle, but King County, I think, is a 2. I don't know if there's a 1 in the country. There may be a 1, and I think Pierce County is a 2 or a 3, and I think, which is where we live around Seattle. And those rating systems mean that they have taken advantage of a whole suite of flood management tools, and it's nothing, to have a Teflon channel or a smooth concrete channel is not one of them. So they've done a lot, and it lowers your insurance. I think it lowers it 40% the cost of flood insurance when you do those kinds of things. So I think they're looking at, and they've evolved quite a bit. When the program is modeled after fire insurance, when you live next to a hydrant, you have fire district 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, depending upon how far you're away from a fire station and all of that. They've kind of modeled their program after that, and they every year have put in additional credits for ecosystem services as they understand their role. And so you got a lot of points for open space, a lot of points for storage, and so it does do that. I don't know what Houston is in terms of the community rating system what rank they are in the county.
I think it's a 5.
It's a 5.
5 or 7. It's either the counties is 7 or a 5, and the cities is 7 or a 5. Anyway, it's not that great, I don't think.
Out of 10?
No.
Yeah, and 1 is the highest, and 10 is you enroll, and I think 9 is you make your maps available, and then 8 is a little better, but when you're up in the 1, 2, and 3s, you have to have some plan for repetitive loss structures. You have to have you get additional points for having a freeboard. You get additional points for open space and on-site storage. And so that may be a way to do that, to have everybody individualize the flooding problem by saying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow water to be on my site for a couple of weeks and cause no harm or on my property. I'm going to do all the things I can in terms of storage. And then you could, take a lot of that. And then I think the bios could take additional flows, but not with a channel. I mean, you can, widen them, certainly, allow that floodplain, to be used, that entire floodplain, and just have it, wider and wider. So it can then, have more capacity that way, not just by digging a channel in. And some of the examples they showed of where you have a channel and you have this green lawn on the side and it looks green, that's a very expensive thing to maintain. I mean, when you have a diverse natural environment with some structure to it, sure, it provides some resistance to flows, but it also provides a sustainable environment. Diversity and complexity is the name of the game in all living things. And so.
Oh yeah, could you explain what happens to a river, to a stream, if you just bulldoze, scrape it all out, and dig out the banks and dig up the bottom and
make it all grass and get rid of the trees?
I mean, everybody knows the answer to this. I mean, it doesn't stay, it doesn't absorb as well into the ground. It doesn't have that ability to kind of cleanse itself. It has a torrent, so you have a problem with just velocities at that point, and problems with sediment. The sediment acts like sandpaper, so then you have to make the walls a little harder, and that grass doesn't work as overflow areas. And besides, in terms of just providing an enjoyable environment that helps cool the landscape and provide some just natural relief, to our living environment, doesn't do any of those services in terms of just allowing, and it's not sustainable. Those monocultures are never sustainable.
Doesn't take care of itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, here's aside on just killing all the aquatic life in there. I mean, we have gigantic alligator snapping turtles in Buffalo Bayou, along with alligators.
I saw those. I saw those on your website. That's good.
And people might not know it, but yeah, we got a lot of tiny river shrimp. We've got mussels, clams, otter, beaver, fish. There's so much, because people don't see what's in the water. There's so much more there than they're aware of. If they got out and look at it, it'd be a lot more interesting than if it was like.
Well, let me talk about beaver for a second. I mentioned beaver in my book a little bit, but since I wrote that, there's been a lot that's been done. So we in the Northwest and in Canada are losing, in Oregon, are losing our snow. It's our snow level is going up and up and up. And so we're losing that summer flow completely. And so our forests are drying out, causing forest fires. And so one way to address the problem is to make it little micro detention areas. And what makes micro detention areas better than anybody else are beavers. And so we are actively trying to introduce beavers in certain areas just to provide that wetted, environment to stop our forest fires. And so we are, there's all sorts of people that are putting in beaver mimicry kinds of activities that create some sound. Then the beavers then come, and beavers, you've got some problems with beavers. I mean, they some of their dams fail. Some the cascading effects with the group, and all
What,
of
you
that.
mean they're not perfect engineers?
They're not perfect, but they
As
are
opposed to people, as opposed to
they're
everything people
awfully
do is
good.
perfect, right?
They are awfully good. And if you look some beaver landscapes and post beaver landscapes,
Yeah.
they're cooler, they're sustainable. It's healthier, it's more enjoyable. It contains more water. I don't know. Would it be possible to actually invest, to have the city invest in just areas that could be occupied by beavers?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
well, we do. There is a proposal to create micro detention on the Katy Prairie out west in the area where, partly in the area where they want to build that Cypress Creek Dam, and possibly, I guess they have beavers. Our beavers in Buffalo Bayou are burrowing.
Okay, they're not dam beavers, yeah.
No, well, though they do dam up, and the flood control comes out and takes them out of the ditches and stuff, but they do burrow into the banks. It's not clear what kind of.
If they didn't have any banks, I think that's a problem probably with the way the banks are. I mean, I think that a lot is being done here. We have a different beaver. I mean, we have beavers that somehow genetically build dams and some that don't also. And I'm getting way out of my comfort level. Other than knowing that a lot of people, and the Association of Wetland Managers has a bunch of videos they've just done on beaver reestablishment, and so I think they're all online. It's the Association of State Wetland Managers, or I think that's I forgot the acronym, but they have a 3-part series on reinstituting beavers and the value that they have, and we're in between a rock and a hard place in terms of our summer flows. We have to, if we don't do something about trying to mimic that snow load that we're losing. I mean, we're going to have a nice period because we have very, very wet winters, and weather is what it is. We're going to have periods the next couple of years where we have just a lot of snow, because we're still going to have we have wetter and wetter winters, and we're still going to have those cold periods, but increasingly those cold periods are becoming less and less and less, and our average snow load, our average snow level is just going up and up and up. And so outside of large dams, which have a real problem and are expensive to maintain, I think that micro dams, whether they're maintained by us or whether they're maintained by our four-legged friends,
or both,
will be a solution, and we're really looking into that. I mean, I would certainly welcome people to do that. I think those beaver restoration projects, I mean, it's amazing how just beneficial they are and efficient they are to holding water and maintaining themselves.
And then I'll put some stuff in the show notes for people to look into about that. But yeah, beavers are called ecosystem engineers, and we hear about the wolves of Yellowstone, and they did have an effect. But a big reason that happened in the Lamar River was not just the wolves alone, but the beaver. Beaver are not usually mentioned. Some things they are. That's how I know about it. But I'll put a video people can see about the importance of beavers for that, and I'll put other videos. Like Susie Creek, I think, is a big story about reintroducing beavers. A lot of land that's not very productive anymore. Beavers are reintroduced. The land is better. Then the farmers like it more. There's better for their cattle. More biological diversity there. Comes up in other places. As I say, scientists are studying beavers to see about how to learn from them to see about using distributed systems instead of one big dam. and they're building like little BDAs, maybe it's called BVA, little dams to mimic what the beavers do, and sometimes help get beavers back in the area. But
and those videos, by the way, done by that association are really great, and they go to that in great detail, both at many different levels. I, of course, blame the French for all that. I think that,
the destruction.
Yeah.
So I've read in a book about beavers, there used to be a lot, and I think the climate of like Maine has changed because there's less water, and I think that's what made the like winters different. It used to be there was a lot of dams, a lot of water that would help hold the heat and everything, but that has affected the whole ecosystem a bit, the whole landscape, just because of like the beavers being gone and not having the water and the whole thermoregulation going on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a kind of off-the-wall question for Bob. The Corps kind of briefly considered the option of removing the dam.
Mm-hmm.
I know removing the dams, kind of different sort of dams. Our dams are, just kind of basically grandiose levees. They're big earthen dams. I'm not quite sure why they ever built them out where they built them in the first place. But what do you think?
Probably for jobs. I mean, if it was done in the 30s, it was for jobs.
Yeah. I mean, there was some serious flooding, a major flood in 1935, 1929 in Houston. But from what I can tell, that flood was mainly caused, the state legislature did a report, mainly caused by a really low bridge down in downtown Houston. But, that was all undeveloped land out there. But anyway, I just kind of wonder what would happen if they just went ahead and removed the dams altogether. Because what happens is they store a lot of water that rushes into it, and then they have to, and now there's too much water. It just is threatening to overflow, which could be disastrous. And they did have to open the floodgates during Harvey, which caused massive destruction. But what if they didn't back up all that water and they just maybe put in micro?
Those engineers can model that. I mean, that would be to have a team of, if just an equal team with as many biologists as people that are working, HEC programs. I think that you could do that. The dams that I'm familiar modeling here were done for fish, and when we remove the dams, the Elwha Dam is the one I'm most familiar with, and there's nobody downstream of it, and it was it had used its life. And as soon as they removed it, the sediment mobilized, and I think it's been about 7 years or so. There's a great guy that I know that works on this. And it's pretty much, it's gone. I mean, it's amazing how fast it has gone back to its natural state. And the runs there have increased substantially. And so it's serving that purpose. I think that it'd be great to actually talk about that. I think that if you had that water has to go someplace. So you have if the water is coming down, the water's stored there, and then it goes, the water then, if it came down, you wouldn't have the sudden peak, but you'd have to kind of control that. You would have water that same amount of water, but it would work its way down with probably not in a single channel, but over several areas, with a lot of it going underground. And so if you had a large forest kind of complex, whether that has homes with forests or with trees, it could kind of work its way through, and then that can be modeled as a way to do it. That sounds
lovely.
And it would be looked. I mean, a lot of the engineering firms would be against it because a lot of the success of that is done by individual people. So you'd have more jobs hired by smaller groups. I think one of the problems with just fossil fuels is that, we now have the technology to go away from fossil fuels completely. But fossil fuels have these large corporations that take a lot of investment, that have a lot of money to, politicize something. And if you went to non-fossil things, it's done by smaller groups. It's done by individuals. You still have the same number of jobs or even more jobs, but they're diverse instead of concentrated.
Mm-hmm.
So my current thinking is that to go back to nuclear, so the large corporations like Shell Oil and everything, can say, okay, I'm going to quit oil there, and I'm going to go into another, kind of investment that takes a lot of capital, a lot of engineers, a lot of people, and kind of go into that, and then we can work about where to store that. Maybe we can, put all of that in South Carolina or something. I know it's. We put it probably in North Dakota. That's where all the hills are. But I don't know. I mean, but I think that we have to go ultimately, to a fossil fuel base, which we technically can do. I mean, so it just takes investment, and you can say that, for 2 aircraft carriers, we could probably change the entire grid in the United States to really, to lose 20% fossil fuel there. And then for another couple, you could, go into wind power and other kinds of power.
Does Europe use more nuclear than we do?
I'm not really sure about that. I think they bought into it more than we did. I don't know where they're storing that. I know that if you look at Denmark, if you look at Iceland's in a unique case. You look at Sweden; they all are going to go fossil fuel less, in the next 20 years. China came out with 2050 that they're going to be fossil fuel neutral. They're going to be carbon neutral during that period. So China is an amazing country, because they're centralized. The bureaucrats just have to say, okay, I want you to go, fossil free or carbon free in 15 years, and by gosh, they'll do it. They'll all do it. I mean, so that kind of things. Here we have these large corporations, international corporations, but so does Shell Oil Company is a Danish organization, I think. It's international, but and they are going. They are slowly emerging from that.
And I think in Russia, if they went nuclear, then some of the leaders would lose their fortunes.
Well, Russia's a problem because they make most of their money by selling oil still.
Yeah.
And so they've got to have something else to export. And so, I mean, it's a big deal. But if you look at the loops that are happening, if you've ever studied, systems, just, with our ice sheet melting, and you don't have that reflective nature back into space. So you have, more energy coming to to the Earth, less being reflected. When less is reflected, you have more melting. You have more melting, you have less reflected. Less reflected, you have more melting. So you're starting this loop, permafrost. You're having permafrost releasing methane. The more methane it released, the more melting. The more melting, the more methane released. So we're going to go up to, talking about sea level rise. I mean, it's you're going to be talking about 20, 30 feet. You're not talking about 1 or 2 feet or 3 feet, because those systems are and that's very easy to model. I mean, sea level rise is very easy to model. You have so much water, we have so much land. That's the easiest thing in the world. And
well, that's another issue about increasing the conveyance of buffalobayou and any other streams, is that these bayous are tidal. They're all the way through downtown Houston. And I think they've even modeled it with, I didn't quite understand, but with the sea level rise, the tidal limit goes even further upstream. So
which means they won't drain. Which means you won't have that drainage. So then you have to really do something else. In terms of the sea level rise models are always falling short. I mean, you're saying up here we say 2 feet by 2100. Well, now we're not saying that. We're saying probably 5 or 6 feet by 2100. And as we understand, this time process, and all of these scenarios are based on us doing something to contain carbon, and we're not doing anything to contain carbon. Mm-hmm. Really, I mean, we are doing. I mean, COVID has really 19 has really done a lot to reduce some carbon, And so that's being studied, but I don't know. But I mean, but these are big issues, and if Bayou is that tidal influence, that conveyance is going to have absolutely, it'll have every year it'll have less effect, and so you really, I mean, then it should be just taken off the board, because or you say that we're going to do it for 10 years, and it'll have a 10-20 year life at the most, and then that'll buy us some time to do the other part.
I'm not even sure that they don't show, and one of the complaints is that they don't give us any of the models that they've used for what they're proposing. I don't know that they've even taken into consideration the fact that it's titled, what the impact would be.
Yeah, well, that's an issue. Then that is, I mean, really, I can't see them not having done that. But if they didn't do that, and they didn't put in climate, the most conservative estimates of sea level rise and tidal influence, then I mean, you're having, with all that energy coming in and not escaping, you've got to look at all this energy that's left to do things. And so energy creates work, and so when there's more energy, there's more work. And when there's more work, in this case, means higher tides, more frequent high tides. It means, all of these things you've been talking about.
Yeah, well, that's what I frequently say.
More storms, more run up.
People don't understand that the Bayou is a living system. It has a life of its own, and you have to take all that into consideration. But in terms of going back to removing the dams, they plan to buy out. There's a lot of houses. The Corps started to straighten the Bayou below the dams back in the 50s after they built the dams, but they weren't able to finish that for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. There was a big citizens movement to stop that, but they did straighten and narrow and even make more shallow, because we did a study of it about 6 miles below the dams. Well, that area flooded really, really badly when they opened up the floodgates. So I think they're planning to, one of the proposals is buying out a lot of that property there. And I know people are heartbroken about that. But if they're going to buy all that land out anyway, maybe they could open up the dams and use it as, creating a lot of different detention area.
As I said, large forests don't have rivers. I mean, it's just in terms of stream density.
Which brings up another issue, that the flood control district in its enabling legislation back in 1937 was given the responsibility of conservation of forests. And of course, they are constantly taking down trees and forests. And I've asked them about that, over and over again. And they say they don't understand why that clause is in there. They couldn't understand what the purpose might be.
Wow. That's interesting. I can't, the Corps up here that we deal with in the Silver Jackets group of the Corps, there is never not an environmental person on the team at the talk. I mean, so we're, as I said, dealing with fish rights and, fishing issues, but so.
They don't seem to have even mobilized the Silver Jackets around here. I've asked them about it. And,
well, it's a good group. It's kind of a response-esque group, but the value of it, and it's led by usually a Corps engineer that does that, but it does have again diversity. And so
explain to Michael who the Silver Jackets are.
Well,
I should have asked. Sorry, I'm falling down on my job.
No, I mean,
I should have asked for the listeners. I'm so pathetic. Sorry, I need more coffee, I guess. Sorry, everybody.
I'm on a group for one of the Silver Jackets groups, looking at the results of flood following fire, and the results of fire and floods. And on that team, we have a bunch of state ecologists on it. And what it is, it's just a group, a formal organization that is project specific sometimes, and where they bring all these talents together on a problem. And it may evolve into a reconnaissance effort and something more formal that the Corps may take a lead in or not, or it may be a lead that the state takes. But it's just a formal organization led by the Corps with the understanding that everything is connected to everything else, and you have to bring in a diverse group to do any project. And so that's they have a nice little website, and I wish I could be more specific on it, but I've been a member of these Silver Jackets groups, but never obviously in a leadership role because I left FEMA, and I think FEMA has maintained some kind of a more of a leadership role in some of those Silver Jackets groups. I don't know why they're called Silver Jackets.
I was going to ask.
It's that because maybe the silver bullet. And I don't know why that lead fire suppression people are called hotshots.
When I think of Silver Jackets, I think of like bumblebees or something.
Me too. Yeah.
It could be that. It could be
Yellow
that.
Jackets, Silver Jackets.
I'm going to ask about the Silver Jackets. There's another virtual public meeting tonight, and I'm going to ask him whether there was any role of the Silver Jackets. I did look up who are the members of their project development team. And there are people from the Corps district offices in Seattle and Portland, and I don't know, Pittsburgh and some other places. They're all, I think, engineers. There's maybe one biologist or.
Yeah, I think that up here, the teams I've had, nobody wears a Scarlet E, right, for their engine. And they're engineers. You have biological engineers as well as engineers, and so I don't really know who's that, but there are biologists on the group that are actively involved in biology, and studies. So, and I think, and as I said, it's teams that are more diverse. All the teams we have, I love in a class. So I've got a piece of floodplain class, and I've got teams that have both engineers, landscape architecture, and ecologists on them as a group. And the dialogues, I think, within their various tools are really fantastic. When I've had teams, I did have a team, and this is kind of an interesting little anecdotal thing, but I had a team, a class where I had the teams, I had all engineers on one team, landscape architects on one team, and just for fun, I tried to see it. And then the engineers came up with a solution. And they were a couple structural guys that were kind of interesting. And so they came up with this conclusion. They said, okay, here's the conclusion. And then I said, well, that's good. And then the landscape architects came up with their conclusion. It was entirely different. And I said, well, that's good. That'll work. And then the engineer said, there has to be one. There's one conclusion. We came up with. And, well, what are these guys doing? And he said, well, it depends on the objective. Well, the objectives are clear. Well, no, they took a different stakeholder. Well, no, there's one conclusion. This one structural guy really had a hard time with, this is the solution, guys. But I think that within the training, the engineering field has obviously changed, and the guys up here are, understand the role they play and the breadth that there is within any kind of discussion of a problem.
You know what that's like a little bit of a cultural problem too. We got to improve. Too much. People think we should be specialized, and they thought we could do that really effectively. But people are finding more the importance of interdisciplinary teams. Like David Epstein actually wrote a book, Range, about that issue. How it's like subtitled, like how or why generalists triumph in a specialized world, and it's not a specialized world, but I guess. The people who published the book thought that would be a good title to get people's attention, and it does. But it's really about how people who, in most fields, if they generalize and know a lot of different things, they're much more effective in their individual career than if they hyper focus.
And I think let me give an example. So we had a problem, and I was the I can't remember if I was the FCO and FEMA on that, but we had a flooding in Salt Lake, and Salt Lake was flooding, right? So here we had a problem, and we wanted to, the airport was getting flooded, and 82 highway Interstate 82 was getting flooded. So we got this team together. How high should we make the levee? How high should we make the airport? And so we had paleolimnologists look at historic records of flows.
Cool.
We had hydrologists look at flows that came in. We had meteorologists look at evaporation
That
rates.
makes my heart feel good.
We had that, and the conclusion was kind of interesting. The conclusion was the meteorologist came up and said, "Look, guys, it's going to go to this height, and and just because at this height it then spills into the Great Salt Lake Desert, and there's no way that you will not have sufficient evaporation. The watershed isn't big enough to put water in, and when it's spread over that area, it's not going to get any higher." Because the evaporation is going to take over and be the controlling factor. So you have so much water come in, you have so much rate of evaporation, and then the Salt Lake Desert was kind of shallow. So as it went in, there was just so much surface area that it couldn't get above this height.
Wow, fascinating.
And that was, you could have done it, but the model, we had historic flows on how high it was, and the meteorologist said, "Look, guys, this is the way it is." And it shows you the beauty of having that kind of a, interdisciplinary team where you have equal weight. It was just fascinating to me to see. And I've done a lot of those, and they just are very, very helpful.
Yeah.
So, and there was agreement. There was agreement. Then the old fossil records that the paleontologists came up with were interesting. But the solution was just not historic flows. This was just that. And then the military was kind of upset with that, the only ones, because they had some activities, some storage areas, and they'd been using that part of the desert for things that they didn't want flooded.
Flown over some of those.
We talked about that, but it just shows you the value of a team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of objectives too, even though it's not really written in the core report, it's pretty, this is Houston, it's a developer town. They assume that the area is going to keep developing. They do admit that if they build the dam on Cypress Creek, it'll open up the air, that development will probably move in below the dam.
Sad.
And then it, we'll be right back to where we were.
Let's look at it as an opportunity, because if you can develop, if you develop it, you're going to, you can have development where the developer is required to maintain a 50-year discharge on site, or a 60-year. You can have it where they have parks that are designed. We have a couple of parks in Seattle where they have swales within them. And during a 100-year flood, the flood floods an area that I think includes one of the streets. As the it'll take the design flow. But you can do that. You can have, if you're going to develop an area, you can take it's difficult to take a 100-year flow, but you can have fail-safe and safe-to-fail areas. In the book, I kind of talk about that, because you can have fail-safe. You really want areas that are safe to fail, but you have a subdivision. We have, I'm trying to think of one up here, but they're designed to take a 25-year flow on site, and then they have areas set aside to take the additional discharge. And we have a home subdivision with a bunch of French drains that, again, in I think it's called Eco Homes in Issaquah, that is designed also to take it.
They do have some design like that in some areas, and there are some new requirements. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it's not as advanced as what you're talking about.
I don't know how advanced, but all of this is possible to do it. If a lot of money is going in the area, if there's development with that money, they can you can pass the requirement down to the developers, because nothing against developers. We all have to live in houses that were developed at one time. But if instead of them passing the costs on to do major improvements, that some of the buyers will have to absorb those costs in terms of, and you could have, you could have subdivisions now like a boat. You could have them where they contain all the water, on site. They have all the sewage can be contained on site. All the power can be actually developed on site. All that is technically possible. Self-composing systems. You can have microgrids. That do have that. There's a lot of work being done in that.
Well, they're probably going to need it because they're building some subdivisions that are going to be completely like islands, not intentionally, but that's to be what they're doing. The problem here, though, of course, is just enforcement. Even though we have some regulations on the books, there's been some studies that, in fact, they're supposed to be building so that the runoff isn't any greater than it was before it's built. But what they do is overestimate the runoff and then or underestimate it, whichever.
And, well, there's also a problem too. In the a lot of the developers, corporations have an LLC that develops it. Then that LLC is disbanded right after the development is sold, and there's nothing accountable. And after Hurricane Sandy, there were areas that we had 4 individual lots, and the owners of the lots, couldn't really afford the increased code. So they had advisory base flood elevations of 12 feet. And so they sold. And so now you had 4 people at grade who then sold. And so this is brought up by a developer who now put 20 units on, combine those 4 lots, assemble the 4 lots, put 20 units, and they were 12 feet above. But the issue really isn't just height, because the flood insurance program and the flood insurance rate maps don't take into account sea level rise or increased storm level or the migration of sand, the beach that started to retreat, which is one of the real issues. And so now you have, instead of having 4 people at risk, you have 20 people at risk, not from an elevation standpoint, but from just the beach starting to retreat. And the firm that developed the property, they were an LLC, and they disbanded the corporation after they sold the units. And now the people that are there are stuck with it. And so they're lobbying to have, beach nourishment that doesn't really do any long-term effect anyway, but something, because now they're between a rock and a hard place because of what we've done. So all of that has to change. The National Flood Insurance Program does have money to control some of this. Also, FEMA, when they do a declaration process, my gosh, they've had all of this destruction. It's a do-over, and that they could actually use some of that money to help move those communities someplace else that's safer.
Yeah.
Politically, that's very hard. I was in one hurricane in Florida, and this was Alabama, and they did not have building codes. And so this was a long, time ago. I think the community now has the building codes, but what I tried to say as the officer in charge, that a lot of the homes were destroyed because housing parts blew into them. They were elevated high enough, but the housing had not held together. So why don't you, I'm going to say that we're going to give you money on the condition that you adopt building codes that prevents this kind of damage. And boy, did we get a legislative backwash on that. And so, but it made perfectly good sense to me that if we're going to put your tax dollars in this area, you've got to, do your best to make sure it's that home is going to stay together and adopt a building code. And in Hawaii, was interesting in Hawaii in Kauai, after one of the hurricanes, the mayor at the time said, we're not going to suspend all building codes, but after this hurricane, we're not going to enforce them. And so the buildings that were built during that period, the next hurricane that came, those were the buildings that went boom. And FEMA had to go in with the same amount of money to rebuild those homes, and with the flood insurance program that were rebuilt without building codes, really, from the last event. So I think that FEMA and your tax dollars have to say, okay, look, we have a plan. Seas are rising, storms are increasing, beaches are retreating, and so this area has a 20-year life. And so you build on this thing that'll last 20 years. And if it goes with, before that period, we may insure it. If it goes after that period, you have to really take your structure up, return it back to the natural environment, and go someplace else, because we're building that for that capacity, and have kind of a leapfrog as we kind of retreat from the coast, because there's no other way. It is a fact. Seas are rising. It is a fact. Storms are increasing. It is a fact that your surges are going to become stronger and stronger. And so, if you want to build an apartment there for a 20-year life, I have a 20-year life. Okay, bring the grandkids, and as long as I don't want to pass the property on, I would buy a property that has a 20-year life. Enjoy it. Kids are there. It's great. Grandkids. But when I, after 20 years, that goes back to its original condition. So we have to think about that.
Yeah. Could I just go back one quick, because I want to write an article about this. Do you think that the flood control district should just leave the sediment in the streams? These are channelized streams that they've already, worked on.
Well, if the sediment is in there, and everything's built on that capacity, or if there's some kind of transportation, it's probably a capacity issue. If the sediment's in there, the sediment would work its way downstream. Naturally, you would do that. And so that depends. But as I said, you're dealing with a whole system. And so if you kill Peter, you save Paul. And if you kill Paul, you save Peter. And so what they do to that sediment depends what they're doing upstream in terms of holding the sediment, because it has to come from somewhere. Here here we sediment's a good thing in the coast. We have landslides along the coast, and we have beaches only because we have landslides, right? And so landslides, and then it gets distributed, are very good, except for the guy on the top of the of the hill that is losing his property. Everybody else is benefiting from that landslide. Mm-hmm. And so again, you have to, when you talk about the core, you kill Peter to save Paul, or you kill Paul to save Peter. And so you can't look at that sediment in isolation. Mm-hmm. And so I think.
Let me see. I got someone else on the hour, so let's dig into something more you want to, and then try to conclude and finish off. Do y'all got anything more you want to say? Any important questions you missed, Susan? Or should we schedule another talk?
Yeah, there's lots of them, but
I don't know if I was helpful in being specific about this, but it doesn't.
Should we schedule another talk? We can talk about that later. But any other questions?
Oh.
Okay, well, just briefly related to that, these streams that they're dredging out are above the reservoirs. So I know that they claim that people want there's a lot of sediment in the reservoirs that's reduced the capacity. The Corps is claiming that they've done a LIDAR study and their sediment is not materially affecting the capacity of the reservoirs. I think people are pretty skeptical about that, because when you stop the water, all that sediment's going to drop out unless it all just washed out when they open up the floodgates. I don't know.
And then it goes down there. It doesn't disappear. And where's the sediment coming from? Is there unforested areas, or could they forest the areas to maintain that sediment? The river the river, reaches a natural state, and that sediment's part of that natural state. And if it's, rivers do many things. One of the things they do is they transport stuff, and like sediment. And if it's above the dam, that sediment's going to go into the dam. And if they have to mine the sediment in the stream, they could also mine it in the dam, or they could shove it farther downstream, or they could hold the sediment and starve the stream a little bit of sediment by doing things upstream. Again, it's a whole system. I mean, you have everything's related to something else. I mean, if you do one, the river is one big energy grade line, and so if you can think of it as a sound wave, it just meanders down, and it's one way to transfer energy from up here to down there, and it transports stuff as a part of that. It transports water as a part of that, and so you have to look at that whole thing. And if you tighten one section, you increase the higher pitch of the section down below, and if you open this up, then you have larger waves and you have more of a woofer. How am I doing? Does anybody know what a woofer is today? I don't know. I don't know.
I remember people referring to woofers.
It's just those deep sounds with the big waves versus the little waves. But
yeah, so on a speaker, everybody, it's like old speakers, and it's a piece of material made of different things that would move in and out to make like part of the sound, treble, bass, and all this stuff, and it could move a whole lot, kind of like a trampoline.
Okay.
Well, people have observed downstream that there seems to be more and more sediment coming downstream. Nevertheless, would that be related? Well, to a lot of things, but if we have more and more water,
No, but it's a fascinating topic, and I think that what you're the problems that you're discussing are no different than any other community that's discussing this. We're in a period of extreme change, and we have to understand that. And so, how do we address that? How do we address energy? It's been potentially there for a long time, such as the sediment. You can look at sediment as potential energy. That's when it becomes kinetic, it moves down the stream. It has to be energized. I mean, all of these things relate to each other, and we have to understand it. So,
okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Really
I've enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you again.
Thank you, Michael.
We need to do it again. But yeah,
Michael,
so it's good.
okay.
In this day
send me the podcast so I can share it with my students.
Cool. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
But thanks for the discussion, and thanks for the time. Appreciate it very much.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Okay.
Bye.